Hey guys, welcome to Alienation. If you are new here, my name is Megan and every single Sunday I sit down and talk about some form of weird, not so wonderful topic that really interests me. And today, this one is more of a, I can't say fun episode because that's just twisted, but I do find this topic so interesting and I find it fun to talk about. I love hearing about these things. I love reading about these things. I could just fall down a really dark rabbit hole for hours and hours on end when it comes to this topic, even though a lot of it is very disturbing. There's some really heartbreaking topics in there, so it is more of an unusual one for me this week. But today I'm actually going to be talking about some really dark conspiracy theories behind some of our favourite childhood TV shows or films or sort of franchises. I'm going to be talking about 3 today. There is so many that I could cover, and it's so interesting. I find this so fascinating. To be honest, a lot of these are very popular theories, so I wouldn't be surprised if most of you had heard of some of these. Like I said, I am very fascinated in them, so I just had to talk about it. However, I will be talking about some very touchy subjects today. I will be covering a lot of mental illness, as well as a bunch of other triggering subjects. So even though I would usually put a disclaimer sort of here, this is a different kind of disclaimer, if that makes sense. So basically, if you find anything regarding mental illness triggering, I completely would understand that you would not want to watch this episode. It is not going to be for everyone. So please consider that even though this isn't necessarily a real life true crime case or something like that, this can contain descriptions, topics, things like that a lot of people will find triggering. So maybe just give this one a skip for today, and I completely understand, and I will catch you in another one. But apart from that, let's get into it. But the first one we're going to be talking about is Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh was a huge thing in my life growing up, and my sister's as well. If somehow some of you have not heard of Winnie the Pooh, which I would be very shocked, but either way, it's still possible. Winnie the Pooh was actually originally created by the English author A.A. Milne, and the English illustrator E.H. Shepard brought him to life, obviously, through illustration. So he is a fictional character, and over time, this character did develop into TV shows. It was bought by Disney. They made a bunch of films, so it became a huge billion-dollar franchise. And the story does centre around a young boy called Christopher Robin. He's 10 years old in the show or in the book, and he regularly visits a place called the 100-acre woods. It sounds weird saying the 100-acre woods. It's not, it's 100-acre wood. He visits there often to hang out with his friends. They consisted of Winnie the Pooh, otherwise known as Pooh Bear or Pooh, Piglet, Tigger, Eeyore, Rabbit, Owl, Kangaroo, and Roo. I don't think I've missed anyone off. As you could probably expect just by hearing their names, all of these friends of his were actually some form of animal. For example, Winnie the Pooh was actually his teddy bear, so his stuffed bear was alive and he'd go on adventures with this stuffed teddy bear. It was a really cute little show for kids, really wholesome content, all that jazz. However, there are a whole bunch of dark and disturbing theories behind the whole Winnie the Pooh franchise. And sadly, a lot of them make sense. So the main theory that is well known and that everyone seems to talk about is that each of the characters is actually a representation of some form of mental illness, or that basically the show consists of characters that all suffer from a mental illness themselves. And if you have watched this show, it makes a lot of sense. So the first character, Piglet, he's really tiny. He's this little tiny pig. He's very cute. However, he's riddled with anxiety. Before I actually carry on, I just want to say, whatever I say is just the theory. It does not mean that I believe that that is the exact match for that illness, that is a right description, that is what everyone suffers with, because that is not the case in the slightest. Every mental illness is so complex. There is so much to it. For example, anxiety is anxious. There is a lot more to it than that, if that makes sense. But this is just kind of what the theory suggests. Just want to very quickly say that I am more than aware that a lot of these illnesses, they don't all stick to these specific things. Just wanted to put that in there. So anyway, Piglet is riddled with anxiety. He constantly worries throughout the show. Whenever any of the team, as we all call them, have an idea or want to go on an adventure, Piglet is the first one to question it, the first one to say, I don't want to do that, I don't think that's a good idea. He's just permanently worried about everything. He's also terrified of everything, even to the point of where he's terrified of falling out of bed. I suppose that is kind of a decent enough fear. You don't want to fall out of bed, you don't want to get hurt, but he pushes it to the extreme to say that it's scarier than falling falling from a great height and things. He's just overall terrified of everything he comes across, everything in life. And throughout each episode or throughout each film, he is permanently shaking from fear. He's got the pure anxiety shakes, which if you suffer from anxiety, you know they are an absolute bitch. If you do have that side effect, they are a nightmare. And he's just riddled with anxiety, the poor little piglet. But next, moving on to Eeyore. And again, if you have seen anything to do with Winnie the Pooh, you will understand that Eeyore, bless his little heart, suffers really, really badly with depression. He definitely is not a ray of sunshine. He's permanently in a depressed state. A lot of the time, there is an actual physical rain cloud above him. So all around him, it'll be sunshine, it'll be really happy. And then he is under a cloud of rain, a thunderstorm, constantly says to him, why bother? What's the point? It's really, really sad to see. And then in juxtaposition to that, we have Tigger. I relate to Tigger on so many levels, not just the whole, I can relate, like I can genuinely relate. And Tigger suffers with ADHD, specifically the hyperactivity part of the disorder. Again, if you've seen it, you'll completely understand. He's permanently bouncing around, he's jumping around, he's causing chaos. There is just no slowing him down. And then next we have Rabbit. Rabbit actually suffers from OCD. And again, specifically, this is the obsessive part of the disorder. And when it comes to cleaning, order, that is exactly what Rabbit suffers with. Throughout some of the episodes, Rabbit is constantly seen putting things in perfect lines, so lining everything up down to the vegetable patch in their garden. Rabbit gets very, very stressed whenever Tigger comes in and disrupts everything, makes a mess. Rabbit just loves everything to be clean, everything has to have a space, which I know can be a very cliche outlook on OCD. There is so much more to it, but that is sometimes a part of it. And if you do watch some of these episodes of Winnie the Pooh and look at Rabbit's character, you can clearly see that this character does really, really suffer with OCD and really needs everything to have a specific order. So next, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is similar to the other characters, but at the same time, just needs to be mentioned, but Owl appears to suffer with dyslexia. Constantly throughout the show, he misreads a lot of things. He messes up reading certain signs. He sends the team the completely wrong directions because he's misspelt something. It is very obvious that Owl either needs reading glasses or he does actually suffer with dyslexia. And then on top of that, he is also a narcissist. He constantly is trying to convince everyone that he's the smartest. He wants to prove that he knows more than everyone. He does have a lot of narcissistic tendencies. So next we have Kanga. See, Kanga and Roo. So Kanga is the mum kangaroo and Roo is the baby kangaroo. As far as I'm aware, they don't actually have or suffer from any form of mental illness. But when I was researching this, I watched a video where someone said that Roo is going to have mental disorders because he has a single mother. Excuse me, bitch. Just because a father figure is missing does not mean he doesn't have a chance in life. It made me very angry actually listening to that, but I know plenty of single mothers who are exceptional and their children are just immaculate. And you just... Obviously it was a guy that said this, because apparently he believed that a father figure had to be there, otherwise the child was going to end up with a bunch of issues. Little tangent there, but regardless, take your old-fashioned ideas, put them in the bin please, along with yourself. Either way, the only thing that appears to be an issue, it's not an issue, but Kanga is very, very protective over Roo, but understandably it's her own child, it's her only child. I wouldn't have said that was a disorder, but that is permanently coming up when I was doing my research, that she was just very overly protected. But again, Kanga is one of the more mentally stable characters, and similar to that, Roo also seems fine. So next we have one of the main characters, and that is good old Pooh Bear. According to these theories, has a bunch of different mental disorders, including an eating disorder. Pooh Bear spends a lot of his time obsessing over honey. He is a compulsive eater, so he does consume it in large amounts. He'll also do things like risk his friends' lives to get a pot of honey, things like that. So he is absolutely obsessed with honey. Throughout a lot of the episodes, he is looking at himself in the mirror, talking about his weight, talking about his size, which leads people to believe he does suffer from some form of eating disorder. Then there are also mentions that he does suffer from ADHD because he has the things like impulse actions, impulse ideas. He can only seem to concentrate either on one thing intensely at once or a bunch of things, and he has a lot of jumbled thoughts. And again, there is also mention that he suffers from OCD as well. And then finally, we have Christopher Robin himself. So Christopher, as I mentioned, is a 10-year-old boy, but he is spending his time in the woods with his imaginary friends, because as we all know, teddy bears can't come, well, I hope they can't come to life. They can't go on adventures with you, and even if they're not stuffed animals and they're animals, he is still picturing them communicating, them being able to talk to him and things like that. So it is led to believe that Christopher Robin suffers from schizophrenia. So there is actually a real story behind Christopher Robin and his friends, and he was actually a real person. And so are the toys, and they are currently on display in the New York Public Library. So Christopher Robin Milne, that name might ring a bell because he was the son of the author of the Winnie the Pooh stories. I think Christopher was born in the 1920s, and he had a bunch of these stuffed animals, and he would play with them. He would go on like little adventures around the garden with them, and I'm pretty sure the family owned something called the 5 or 300 acre wood or something, and that is where the 100 acre wood came from. So the first Winnie the Pooh book I think was released around 1926, and it took off massively. It was a huge hit, so everyone knew that the character was based around Christopher Robin, and he was really young at the time, and sadly this kind of just thrust him into fame. And when child stars get thrust into fame, it's pretty intense. And sadly, little Christopher did end up getting bullied for this. We've talked about this multiple times on Alienation. Kids are mean. There are so many innocent kids who get bullied, and it is absolutely heartbreaking, and Christopher sadly was one of them. He was quite a shy child, and he already had really, really low self-esteem, so he just really struggled when it came to being bullied. I mean, any kid would. But one who didn't think much of himself to begin with, that's just so sad. So yeah, fame sucks, and as he grew up, he pretty much ended up hating Winnie the Pooh and hating the stories. So sad times for good old Christopher Robin. So as far as we're aware, the Christopher Robin actual story in person is real and exists, but this whole theory that people have come up with, it makes a lot of sense. It is very hard to watch these episodes and these films and not compare the characters to these disorders. It is, yeah, it's kind of obvious, but at the same time, back in those days when this whole franchise was created, these weren't known illnesses, but they were just classed as like personality traits. It is a funny one, but yeah, there has obviously never been any form of confirmation that that's what these characters were meant to represent, but regardless, it is a very interesting theory and it does make a lot of sense. So moving on, next we have a show that was aired on Nickelodeon. I think it actually lasted around 16 years or so. I adored this show, and it is Fairly Odd Parents. I was obsessed with that bloody theme song as well. I'm pretty sure it still gets circulated around TikTok and stuff now today. It's, yeah, well-known song. You'll know it. But Fairly Odd Parents basically follows the adventures of the 10-year-old boy Timmy Turner and his two fairy godparents Cosmo and Wanda. When you actually think about Timmy's story, it is quite a sad one actually. So Timmy's actually neglected by both of his parents. They don't pay much attention to him in the slightest, and he gets both verbally and physically abused by his babysitter Vicky, who at the start of the series was kind of like the villain of the show. But in a nutshell, he gets granted these two fairy godparents who have to grant all of his wishes just to help improve his life, blah blah blah. But usually when they do grant him these wishes, they don't go too well, and then it ends up kind of chaotic, a bit of a disaster, and Timmy ends up having to fix these issues even more and kind of clean up after the magic. That's basically what the show is about, but there is a couple of theories behind this show. So the first theory is that Timmy is actually suffering from depression, and that both Wanda and Cosmo are actually side effects to two different types of medication that Timmy is taking. Or similar to that, they're actually supposed to be metaphors for the antidepressant medicines he's taking. Does that make sense? And to support this theory, the two fairies do constantly tell Timmy that overly using their magic or constantly asking for wishes will result in bad things happening, which kind of reflects the use of drugs or use of overly taking medicine. They are good in small doses, they are good to help certain things like help with your depression, but then if you overly use them or abuse certain substances, it's never going to end well. So the next theory gets a little bit dark. They're all dark to be fair, but this theory is that Cosmo and Wanda are actually Timmy's real life godparents who have sadly passed away. So his real life godparents were really, really kind. They really, really cared about him. They loved him, which is completely different to how his real parents treat him. His real parents kind of neglect him. They don't really care. And after losing them, he created this whole world where he has these fairy godparents watching over him. They have a whole bunch of magic to help him deal with this real life situation where he has lost his godparents. And this theory again is supported by the fact that after the magic has actually created all this bunch of chaos and crazy situations, there's never any lasting consequences after it, so it makes sense that it is kind of all in his head and he's created this illusion just to keep himself happy and get through this grief. So those are just a couple of the theories when it comes to Fairly Odd Parents. Again, there's no proofs or claims from the producers or the directors from the show about the theories, so who knows? knows? If you do want to look into it more, there are a few different theories when it comes to Fairly Odd Parents, but they're just a few that I'm going to brush over today. Moving on to the third and final show. This is the most popular one. I'm pretty sure everyone has heard of this, and if you haven't and you want to keep the idea of the Rugrats nice and happy in your mind, then you might want to turn off now. But the Rugrats is a 90s TV show, and I'm pretty sure it is still going today. But it was basically an animated show that centered around a bunch of toddlers and all their wacky and crazy adventures that they used to go on. It would follow their day-to-day life, and their little adventures basically went down in their imaginations. But yeah, they went on little adventures, and it was a really cute show. Everyone loved it, and I'm pretty sure everyone knew how to play the theme song on piano as well. So it focused on the characters Tommy, Chucky, Phil and Lil, Angelica, Spike and Baby Dill. If you didn't know that little weird rhyme, you probably never actually watched the Rugrats. So Spike was the dog and the rest of them were children or toddlers in the show. And Tommy was kind of the main toddler who would always instigate these little adventures. It was just a really cute little show. If you've never seen an episode, go and watch one. However, like the others, there is a very popular, very dark theory behind the show. And that is that the entire group of toddlers were all in Angelica's imagination. And she's only 3 years old in this show. So the theory is basically that the toddlers and the experiences that they all went on were just projections of her psychological breakdown. She was super, super lonely. She was very neglected by her parents. They never had the time for her, which we do see in the show. And sadly, at the age of 3 years old, everything became too much for her and she created this whole delusion. So the theory goes that Tommy, one of the main characters, was born in 1988, but sadly he was a stillborn and he didn't survive. And this is kind of apparent in Tommy's appearance if you compare him to the likes of the other toddlers in the show. So his lack of hair. I know not all toddlers and babies have hair, but it's very apparent. He doesn't have any hair. His outfit is very, very different. So all the other toddlers are dressed in little outfits. Tommy's in a diaper and he's also got a very awkward fitting t-shirt on, which reminds me of kind of what a newborn would wear. They'd have something like a little baby grow on and a nappy. And if you just look at his mannerisms, how he walks, he does seem pretty underdeveloped compared to the other toddlers. And sadly in the show, his dad Stu is constantly in the basement making toys, as in making children's toys. And apparently he's making all of these toys for the son that never had a chance to live. He's going through some form of depression, some form of grief, some form of loss, and this is how he's dealing with it, just constantly making toys for the son he no longer has, which is so sad. And then moving on to Chucky's story. So if you have seen the show, obviously you've got Chucky and his father. And in the show, in 1986, Chucky's mum sadly died in a car accident. And according to this theory, Chucky did too. He was also in the car and in the accident that his mum was in. And this would actually explain why Chaz, so Chucky's father, is an absolute wreck in the show. He's nervous all the time, he's panicking all the time, he's always sweaty, and that's because he'd not only lost his wife, but he'd lost his son as well. So he was compensating for that loss by constantly panicking over Chucky's well-being, always being protective over him and things like that. So next we have the DeVilles, which is Phil and Lil's mum and dad. So Phil and Lil are the twins that are in this show, and the DeVilles got pregnant, so with Phil and Lil, and Angelica actually knew about this pregnancy. However, the couple did decide to have an abortion, and this was in 1990, and because Angelica knew of the pregnancy, but she now didn't know what the baby was going to be, as in gender-wise, she then chose to create twins. And the next character we have is Dill, which is Tommy's younger brother. And Dill seems to be the only real baby in this situation. So when you watch the show, Angelica can make the babies disappear, which again supports the idea that it's all in her imagination. However, she cannot make Dill disappear. And she gets very, very frustrated with him because he doesn't listen to her. She can kind of control the other babies and the other toddlers, but she can't with Dill. And all the other babies can talk and Angelica can communicate with them and she can understand them. However, she can't with Dill. And the theory suggests that that's because he's the only baby that is real and he's there in real life and not in Angelica's imagination. So sort of similar to this, I did read a theory about the TV show Friends and how all that was in Phoebe's imagination, and that was really clever. Obviously, it wasn't real, wasn't true, not what the show was based around, but if you get a second, look into that because it's pretty clever, but it is similar to this theory with Angelica and it all being in her mind. But anyway, what actually happened to Angelica to cause all of this? So one of the theories does suggest that her upbringing was very, very bad. She did not have a good start in life. So can you remember Cynthia, her weird ratty doll? It's got like crazy blonde hair and half of it's all falling out. Well, that doll actually is supposed to remind Angelica of her real mum. Angelica's real mum was sadly a drug addict and she had passed away from an overdose. So I don't like using this term, but Angelica was a crack baby. as I say in air quotations. It's a horrible term, but it's basically when someone is pregnant, they're addicted to drugs, and they've got a bunch of drugs coursing through their system. Obviously, that is going to reach the baby, is going to massively affect the baby, and sadly, a lot of the times, the babies don't make it. But Angelica did survive, but there was a lot of repercussions for this. And Angelica suffered massively with her mental health because her mum was a drug addict. So Charlotte, her stepmother, I believe, which is the one we see in the show, the one who's constantly on her phone, constantly dressed up in her business wear. She only really cares about her career, so she doesn't show Angelica any form of love. She doesn't get any form of affection that kids need, especially kids who have lost their parents. Like, they need that affection. And yeah, her stepmom doesn't give it to her. So Angelica created this whole bunch of friends. They're not really friends, but acquaintances in her imagination, just so she had someone there to keep her company, or maybe she was hallucinating these toddlers, or yeah, creating them using the knowledge that she has of the real world. So we are going to jump forward a little bit into Angelica's teenage years, and there was a show called All Grown Up, which follows the same characters from Rugrats, but they're all older now. I think they're all teenagers and they're all attending high school. So the theory suggests that Angelica was suffering from bipolar and schizophrenia, which meant she was still seeing the toddlers and seeing the kids. She was still seeing Tommy, Chucky, Phil and Lil, as well as Dill. Obviously, if this theory, I say in air quotations, is correct, of course you will be seeing Dill, because Dill was the real baby. So Dill in this show is now 9 years old, and he is a bit of an outcast. He gets ridiculed, and he also gets bullied because he has disabilities. So as far as we know, back in the day, like I mentioned, Angelica hated Dill because she couldn't control him, she couldn't tell him what to do, she couldn't make him disappear. So one time when she got so angry with him, she attacked him, and she hit him really hard over the head, which sadly resulted in him suffering a life-altering brain hemorrhage. And apparently Angelica never got over this. She was super guilt-ridden over the fact that she had pretty much given Stu's only surviving son a disability, and this continued to eat away at her. So as she was getting a little bit older, she followed in her mother's footsteps and started taking hard drugs. And apparently she even died of an overdose at the age of 13, which is when the show All Grown Up was cancelled. So the theory is basically that the show was axed due to Angelica's death, which is weird because obviously it's not real. It's a cartoon. There's not real life actors, but that's the theory as far as it goes. So just to conclude on that one, I know full well that the Rugrats creators have actually denied this theory. It was created by fans and created by the internet, but it does all make a lot of sense. It is such an interesting theory. There is a little bit more to it, which I would recommend going and researching because it's very interesting, and I do find it very fascinating. I know that's a little bit sick and twisted, but I think it does make a lot of sense, even though it isn't real and it was created. Makes a lot of sense. So there are so many crazy theories, like I said at the start, behind so many TV shows. Disney theories, that's a huge one. There's just loads out there, and if I was to cover every single one of them, this episode would never end. But that is actually everything for today's episode. You'll have to let me know what sort of fan theories, TV show theories, any conspiracy theories like to do with this category that you are really interested in. I would love to hear them because I'd love to read about them. Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you are watching on YouTube, please interact with this video. Please give it a thumbs up. Please leave me a comment down below and subscribe if you are not. And if you are listening on podcast streaming services, thank you so much to you guys as well. Please rate, review, share, do whatever you can to help spread the word, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye!